country attempted to identify a sustainable growth trajectory. So recognized was his work in this area.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Colleagues of the head table, members of the diplomatic corps, members of parliament, other special invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure today to spend a few moments here talking to you, and I wish to thank the GMSA for its kind invitation and opportunity to do so. The chairman of the GMSA, in his presentation, said that this is an ongoing discourse. And some few months back, they had the Minister of Business here to share the government's perspective on the economy and our future. Unlike the minister, I do not have a prepared speech because I know we are going to have an interactive session following my presentation. And I hope that I can share with you in almost not a very structured manner, but some of the most pressing concerns that people in the business community particularly have brought to my attention, to the party's attention, over the past several months. And there seems to be a huge fear in the business community today that matters that will affect their well-being are not given the priority of this government. And so the chairman mentioned Minister Gaskin's speech. And I had a chance to look at this speech. And the speech focused extensively on our ranking in various the international indices, the Global Competitiveness Index, how we are faring with the UN Human Development Index, the Doing Business Guide, etc., and where we stand there. And secondly, it focused also on saying we should not worry too much about what's taking place in Guyana, because we should just look at our neighbors, Brazil, Venezuela, Barbados, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and they're doing badly too. And so there is no crisis. The conclusion, there is no crisis in Guyana, that we need to trust the government to pursue its long-term development plan, and that the private sector is a key partner. He concluded thus in his speech. Well, we've been trying for the past year and 3 months or so to find out exactly what this long-term plan is that the government speaks so frequently of. We hear one time that they have a long-term plan and that it's focused on the green economy. From another official, we hear that they're busy working on this plan and that it would be unveiled shortly. And then from a third set of officials that they're already implementing elements of this plan. Yet we cannot find this plan written anywhere. It has never been definitively explained to the people of this country. Unlike our approaches throughout the tenure of the PPP, as the national task changed, so too did our long-term strategy. So at the beginning, right at the beginning, we crafted the National Development Strategy. And the primary task at that time was macroeconomic stability, because you would recall that at that time, inflation was triple digit, and the fiscal deficit was 25% of GDP, and the balance payment deficit was close to 47% of GDP. And based on Greenwich's own admission, debt servicing was 153% of revenue, almost impossible. And the stock of debt was over 700% of GDP. So that was critical. There would have been no economic strategy in Guyana without fixing the macro fundamental. And the National Development Strategy set that as one of its primary tasks. We also had a problem with major infrastructure, social and economic. And so you'd recall those days when you'd have blackouts that last for 2 weeks, routinely, 2 weeks. And it was impassable to drive on the roads, and it took several hours to reach the airport. And the hospitals were all run down, and the schools. And the second task of the National Development Strategy was to make the rebuilding of infrastructure, social and economic infrastructure, a priority. And the third task was to focus on the democratic institutions of the state and to rebuild them, the independence of the judiciary, getting Parliament to function more, creating a truly independent audit office, because we had no audits for 10 years of the national accounts prior to that period. So those were the tasks. And then, after some time, the tasks changed. And the society started growing, our economy, and we wanted to focus particularly on poverty. And we developed the poverty reduction strategy, all defined. And then our businesses started plateauing because of high electricity costs, their prospects, because of high freight, because we did not have an international airport, a good airlift, or a deep water harbor. And so we crafted the National Competitiveness Strategy that will focus on the long-term structural issues that will make the business environment more conducive to the development of competitive businesses that can export into a global economy. And then the world changed again, and the environmental sector became a critical one. And we saw an opportunity to earn from our forests large sums of money. An annuity of over $500 million based on our calculation per annum. That would probably far exceed the total exports of rice and sugar and forest products, just from the sale of forest carbon. And we took that opportunity and we said those resources would be used to transform the rest of the economy. It wasn't a green strategy, it was a development strategy. And so we crafted the National Development Strategy. I'm telling you this because we had clarity about where we were going and when the task was changing. And we weren't perfect, but we knew where we were going. What does this government have now? It says it believes in a green economy. The first budget that was presented, we excused the government. We said, well, it's a few months from the time they took office, so maybe they have not had time to think this through as yet. So let's wait on the second budget, because they said they had this strategy when they campaigned. And in the second budget, we heard about this green economy driving Guyana, but we said a green economy has to be underpinned by programs, policies, projects. It has to have funds to implement it. There's none of that defined. It can't be just a declarative statement. And so we never had that, this long-term outlook. And then even in the short term, and because this is something that the private sector has been arguing for, short-term interventions, not just the long-term. We had the Minister of Finance saying in his budget speech, the last one, Three things will affect Guyana in the short term. One, lower commodity prices. Two, the ending of quantitative easing in the United States of America, which would push interest rates up. And three, he did not say this, but in his presentation, one could have surmised that this would be a problem, deflation, because we have had negative inflation in the past year. And you know that is, looking at the global situation, that could become a problem. But in the policy prescriptions of the government, we have not seen any attempt to address any of those issues. Can you give me some water, please? I have a sinus problem, so it's drying up. So none of these. So today, I want to talk a bit about what affects private sector. It is not the ranking on various international indices, as the minister sought to portray here, and that, we'll focus on improving from 137 to 134 or 125. It does not matter at all. What matters is what is done here in Guyana. How the government seeks to navigate the global challenges that may be common to many countries, but challenges that can be overcome by sound policies. So, to attempt to compare and excuse Guyana and absolve it from the need to practice any proactive short-term policy, the minister quotes Barbados. But Barbados have had structural problems for a very long time. Major structural problems. And Barbados does not have the fiscal room that we have. Barbados, their to GDP ratio is now over 100%, has grown in the last few years to over 100%. In Guyana's case, we've come down from 900% of GDP to under 50% of GDP. And most of our debt are fixed-term debt until multilateral institutions or bilateral donors at average interest rate maybe of 2-3% maximum interest rates. Because, unlike Barbados, which goes to the market to borrows heavily from the market. And so you cannot compare Guyana with Barbados, because Barbados does not have the fiscal room. In Suriname, in 2011, I recall 88% of their exports and 40% of their revenue came from just three products: gold, oil, and alumina, the export of alumina. By 2015, Soralco had closed its operation, the alumina refinery. And so that created a huge problem, not only for export earnings, but also for government revenue. In Trinidad and Tobago, oil-based economy, their balance of the current account deficit slid to over 5% of GDP recently, because reflecting lower prices for oil and gas, for which they rely on mainly. So every one of these countries have seen a deterioration in their terms of trade for the major exports and a sliding of their current account deficit. I had a chance to look at our mid-year report that was recently tabled in the Parliament. In Guyana's case, the current account deficit was $181.5 million in 2015. It was forecasted to improve to $116.9 million this year. At mid-year, it is 40.9 positive, and it is now revised to be 72.9 million. A swing from a budgeted swing of minus 116 to 72 million. Now this is close to $190 million improvement in our current account deficit, or current account position, from the time the budget was presented to now. And how can you argue that you're in a comparable position with these countries? We have seen major improvements in our current account position, largely because of the fall in gold prices, oil prices. And so we have saved over $250 million because of lower oil prices. What is a problem for Suriname and Trinidad and Venezuela is positive for us. So we should be doing better, not worse. And when the minister sought to excuse our performance by citing these countries, he was being disingenuous. Because the structures of the economy, their sources of revenue are different. Very, very different. And so coming back to my main point, that is not the excuses that will move our country forward, because this country has started, and the government has developed a new industry. It's manufacturing excuses. That's the most thriving industry we have now, manufacturing excuses. You have to clearly define the long-term goal of this country, where it's going to get in 5-10 years' time, and what are the policy measures you need to get there. And you need now to not hide like your head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich, but address the reality of a declining economy, because the economy is declining. This government has not gotten a major investment of consequence since they got into office, although we were told that there are long lines of people waiting for them to come. And the minister in his speech here said, since we got into office, ExxonMobil found oil, which was not true too. ExxonMobil and almost every one of those oil companies came here under the People's Progressive Party, under a very stable regime, the Petroleum Act. And the companies in the gold mining sector, there are tens of them. And the two that are generating all the gold now that keeps this economy growing, because although they operate in an enclavic way, because if you take out those two companies that have started producing last year, you will see that the growth rate that had to be revised downwards will go into negative territory, because all of the major sectors of our economy have gone into decline. Manufacturing, rice, sugar, recently forestry, and the others are just marginal growth or very, very very stagnant. We see them growing in. So all of those investments came from the past. So one of the things, as I said before, you have to address those sectors. But did they address them? Are they addressing them? How can they address them? I thought that in a $230 billion budget, the largest in our history, that this government would have tackled the problems of various sectors by creating more incentives, having pointed out that our manufacturing sector and our exporters will now face greater competition and lower prices in the international markets. Will try to work with those exporters to help them further reduce their costs so they can then maintain market share abroad and not lose out on the economic activities. And how do you do that? You work with them through greater help in this period. We have witnessed not just greater help, but the reverse of that. And so let me give you an example. In the first budget, the Minister of Finance said, there are too many concessions given to the private sector. They're given to friends and family of PPP people. $55 billion of concessions. I heard the president repeat this, saying just before Guy Expo, we have to review these concessions. 3 days ago, the Commissioner General said the VAT, we didn't collect the VAT, enough VAT, there is a shortfall because of the concessions that the People's Progressive Party gave in the past. Because of that. So, what is the reality of this? What were these concessions given for? Were they given to friends and family of the PPP? No, they were not. So, what the government has done, the government has reduced. If you look at the mid-year report, it has reduced concessions by over $5 billion to the private sector. Check the page 88, you will see total tax remission in mid-year last year was 26 billion. It has dropped to 20 billion. And for companies, this has dropped from 20.2 billion to 14.7 billion. And what were these remissions? The remissions were basically, if you're a registered manufacturer, and you bring in, say, oil to make margarine. We could not zero rate the oil because it has general use. But if you're a registered manufacturer, you got the oil tax-free because you paid on your output. And if we charge you taxes on the input, and then you have to pay taxes on output, you'd have cascading, you'd have a company paying taxes on taxes. And so that was where those taxes were remitted because oil has general use. It's not tax-free for everyone, but it's tax-free for a manufacturer. Similarly, heavy-duty equipment. The remission of the VAT was not for members of People's Progressive Party and, or their families. The 16% VAT on heavy-duty equipment, tractors, combines, the excavators, skidders, etc. The government removed that. So now, if you bring in a combine or an excavator or anything else, not for driving on the road, but for productive purpose, you have to pay 16% more VAT because the government argued that the remissions were too high. This is what happened. These are the signals that are important. So today I'll tell you why there is such a fear in the business community. People come to talk to me. Why people do not want to invest in Guyana. What are this? It has to do more with the signals that this government is sending. The first signal is this country is driven by drug money, and that it's the drug money that slowed down, that's causing the economic problems we have. Well, that may be good for a domestic audience and your supporters, but just imagine a sophisticated investor who sits in Canada or elsewhere in the world and hear that the government is saying that the economy is driven by drug money. Why would I want to go there? Just imagine if you're the officials of FATF or some other organization that looks at illicit flows. Then this country comes up higher on your radar for greater scrutiny. Just imagine if you're a bank and you have a correspondent relationship with Guyana, a bank in Guyana, and already we know the trouble that we've had with de-risking for developing countries. Even the Financial Stability Board has been trying to deal with this because this could push third world countries, small countries, back into the Stone Age in terms of financing, and it will have a big impact on their economy because we know the well-being of the financial sector is closely correlated to the well-being of the real sector in any economy. We're fighting that already globally as a block of countries. And now you're arguing that drug proceeds been driving the economy here. Why would those banks want to have a correspondent relationship with any of your institutions? That's one. Next, in the campaign to go after opponents, you hear this widespread thing that public officials are all corrupt. So we've had 45 audits of all these agencies, and they're all found to be corrupt in some form. Although we're not seeing the prosecutions, which should happen, but after a forensic audit, you should have people being prosecuted after you find corruption. But all these, from GEA was corrupt, the GIAL was corrupt, every institution they found corruption in. So why would a sophisticated investor want to come here? Then this country will rip them off. These corrupt officials will try to solicit bribes, etc. What's good for the domestic audience and politics, not good for the economy and a sophisticated global audience. And they're still in the campaign mode. Next, what should you expect? What are the signals? So we're talking about signals from this government now. So that's the first set of signals to the international community. Let's take an approach to taxation matters now. A whole slew of new taxes, and now to get your licenses renewed. These are for many small businesses across Guyana. If you have like a small dray cart, you're selling goods on the side of the road, you just don't have to pay 600% more for the license. You now have to show that you paid your taxes in the past 7 years before you get your license renewed, which is unconstitutional because it affects the provision that we put in the Constitution, the right to work provision. You can go after an individual for not paying taxes. You should use the law and go after him, GRA. But you can't link that to his ability to work, to get his license to practice his trade. Totally two separate issues. But that's what's happening to thousands of small businesses across Guyana. When many of you are urban-based, and many of you have bigger businesses, but you should find out from the people in the markets. These are small people, the markets and the shops across this country. How many times they have been raided, and they have to come and spend days at the GRA and can't sort out their issues. This is from a government that says, notionally, that it wants to develop small businesses, but has no plan to do this. It's affecting them. That's with relation to small business. What about large business? Now, at least there were rules there in the past. We put our faith in the courts and in GRA, not the politicians. Had nothing to do with tax matters. So we had a dispute over taxes on the Hague-Bush project. We terminated the contractor because we believe he did not perform, and he went to court. And it would be settled in the court, and at the end of the day, the court makes a ruling, and the government respects the ruling. The DDL matter. DDL sued the government. It took years to solve the issue, almost 10 years, because the courts would not hear the matter. The court then directed GRA to use a formula. They used the formula. The formula came up with $5.3 billion of taxes, leaving out the interest. The government settles it for $1.5 billion. The Rudisa matter, the Dipcon matter, all of these were quoted. So what we have had in 4 settlements, in just 4, and there are many others because you just cannot get information. We went to Parliament and asked, who made this settlement? Only the Commissioner General can do so, because that's what the law says. But the Commissioner General did not. So was it the board? Was it the cabinet? It's illegal. And we were told, you can't get this information. And so the 4 settlements alone will expose the Treasury to about $80 billion of liabilities, close to $400 million from 4 settlements. If the PPP had settled a $50,000 issue, you hear about corruption. So now, what signal does it send to companies? You have to know somebody at GRA. You can get your tax matters settled. Don't worry, just if you have to pay taxes now, just go to the court, because the government has said, we are worried about losing in the court, so we will settle. We'll take 1/5 of what your tax liabilities are, because we worry about the court. And you should stop paying taxes if that's the approach of the government. Because then you wait a year, and then you find some sympathetic person in the government, and you settle your case. And they have no obligation to report to the parliament or to anyone else, or to the nation. What signal does that send to investors? Because if I am like Bank CIH, if I'm operating in the same sector like DDL, and we have 2 different tax regimes, how would the playing field be level? That harms private investment more than anything else. This whole thing about electricity and the future. We all, maybe I'd come to signals. And I just want to deal with the Amila Fall to give you an idea about how a project could be sacrificed due to convenience, and because there's another project that the government is sympathetic to. We have argued for a fact-based analysis of Amila, not a political-based analysis of Amila. We were told that this project is too expensive, but it was 10 cents per kilowatt hour that the government will be buying power for. Recently we heard they didn't have the documents, and they have a list, and I have that flash drive too, where they have every single document about Amila, from the site global to China Rail, to the EPC contract, to the transmission main contract, the power purchase contract. Everything is with the government. But the conclusion would have been 10 cents per kilowatt hour. We were told by the Minister of Finance in the last budget that GPL is generating power 28 cents per kilowatt hour. And when we objected, they arrogantly denied it, said it's true. In the worst time, when fuel prices were $114 a barrel, in 2012, GPL was generating at 20 cents per kilowatt hour. How could it be generating at 28 cents per kilowatt hour now that the price is 30-something dollars per barrel? But that was to justify, and then the big bomb came after. The minister said, we are negotiating a power purchase agreement for 14 cents per kilowatt hour from wind power, from one of their supporters. Killing a big project that would have brought not just energy but capacity, unlike a wind power project. And why am I saying this? That's a casualty. But how are they going to address long-term electricity costs? We are enjoying a period of relative calm and basically good prices. But these are going to turn against us again. I was reading the IEA forecast. They said already the demand is outstripping supply in the market for fuel, although they do have some inventories. Prices are going to climb back in the future for fossil fuel. What do we do in a year's time or 2 years' time when the prices climb back? We have no plan, and we're not even making short-term investment plans. We're going to have a crisis in the future that will affect manufacturing. Two nature, shortages as well as higher prices, because the investment decision is not being made now, and it's not being made on the basis of facts. What are the other uncertainties in the business community? I spoke about the changes in the taxation regime. The minister sits in his office, like I heard a week ago, he sent another letter over to change, to move VAT from 5% to 10% for steel. These things are done routinely without any regard for Parliament, without any regard for consultation, etc. So we are clear about signals. All the signals are wrong. The lack of predictability about how the government will operate. It has no short-term plan. It has no long-term plan. It acts capriciously. It acts in a partisan way. These are all important issues. And then how it uses the arms of the state, the fear element for people who have money. People have to feel now the business community very insecure. Not because they can't explain their sources of wealth, but because of the police state methods that are being used. Now, when we set up SOCU was set up for a particular purpose. It was to assist the Financial Intelligence Unit to go after money launderers, people who are moving money illegally for other purposes, etc. Fell under the authority of the commissioner. That has now shifted over, although we hear publicly that it's still under the commissioner, it's gone over to OP. Directions are taken from the office of the president. We've been promised a protocol, and until now the protocol has not emerged. So what they get is a list of names for people to go after. They don't follow the investigation trail. They don't go and say, here this guy has a lot of money in his bank. Here he's been taking out too much money from the country. Let's work backwards and get to him. They are starting with a list of names. And if you're PPP or you're perceived to be PPP, you're on that list. But they raid at 3 in the morning, seize people, things, etc. We'd always support SOCU to do its work, but it must be done in a non-partisan way. SARU now, it is totally illegal. Desmond Trotman, who works in SARU, PPP hater, you know that. Eric Phillips, Clive Thomas, all of the others. The one person was fired by the PP from the judiciary. She works there now. Every anti-PPP person has been now put in SARU. Excuses. I saw they had a consultation about SARU law. And nobody said that many of the ministers of this government never complied with the Integrity Act. Why do they have to wait on the SARU law? Why not charge people? It's a criminal offense for not complying with the Integrity Commission Act, which has been in place since 2000. Many current members, and they don't want to because there's no baseline to start with them. So you can't measure the assets, how it has changed over the years for those individuals. We went to Parliament and we asked that these records be made public, the Integrity Commission and the tax records for members of Parliament, ex-presidents, etc. They voted against it. We put a proposal to hire an international firm now, you don't have to wait on legislation, to find assets for all former officials and current officials of government. Shares, bank accounts, holdings, properties, etc. They can do that tomorrow. But they will not be able to do it in this manner, because when that is done, then it has to go to the courts. And the courts are still independent, and the police still have some independence, and the PPP's office. So they're creating a parallel system with their own prosecutors, even undermining the independence of the judiciary. The judiciary. A judge has to give some order. The director of the public prosecution has to cooperate. These are constitutional positions with some individual, and then guess who is they're gonna put there again. But this is not going to be used only against political opponents. It's going to be used against everyone. And it is this fear element. It's pervading the business community. I talk to people, nobody wants to borrow. Nobody wants to invest anymore. Signals are important. Signals are very, very important for the future. We will support the government fully in any matter that where it goes after illegal money or international cooperation. Basil Williams misled FATF. He said to them the last time, and they put on their website, that we had a fully compliant financial FIU. It was not true. The Parliament, they established 3 new bodies through the new act, and they were not in place. At that time, we hadn't even hired the director of FIU. So if you think deleveraging is bad, and when the people find out about this, it will even get worse. We run the risk of not moving from this under review to other places, even blacklist. Do not do this sort of thing. So I will end here because for me, it's about signals. I believe that there is great possibility for long-term development of this country. We can't act. The government is in a mode, it's like Samuel Beckett's book, I don't know if you read it, Waiting for Godot. And they had this guy, Vladimir, and I think Estragon, standing by a roadside and waiting for this Godot who never came. The oil is Godot for them. They're waiting for Godot to come and solve all the problems of the world. So every minister, everybody, we're waiting for oil. The government is in that mode. In the meantime, no definition of a long-term plan. We will contribute to that long-term plan. We're clear about where we should take our country. We are in a green sense, in a sense of growing income and wealth. We're clear and we're willing to collaborate. There are key fiscal and monetary policies that can be used in the short term to stimulate growth and to bolster economic activities. This is not rocket science. Many countries that have the fiscal space have done this. The United States of America has been very creative with this quantitative easing. They've made money so loose. They grew the balance sheet of the Fed reserves from $1.2 trillion to $4.5 trillion. So many other countries have done this. Here, we have deflationary risk, and we're tightening monetary policy. We're tightening monetary policy, creating more hardships. We have fiscal space to do more, and we have the monetary tools. And so we can do things in the short term. We can help, not take away concessions from businesses. We can help them in the short term. We have to defend national interests. This whole thing about removing the taxes from raw materials under the CET, we made it clear. So we did that, and we will defend it always. And I heard that some of our people have applied to CARICOM for waiver, and they got those waivers, and that's good. But the moment you go down that route, the next time a CARICOM country complains to the Secretariat, they would say, we're not giving the waiver. So we've now put what was in our hands to execute, national policy, in the hands of the bureaucracy of the CARICOM Secretariat. And I must say it's not a very healthy bureaucracy. And we've now put that there in the hands of the Secretariat there and in the caprices of other countries. They can complain, and a lot that can kill our manufacturing sector. We should be defending that. We should be helping. We should be trying to get cheaper resources. And so I believe the country is in problem, it is in a crisis, and we're decumulating wealth, where our revenue is falling, not because PPP gave too much concessions, because of a shrinkage of economic activities. And we don't have, the government has no clarity about where it's going. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jagdeo. And I'm sure that I can see